Hi, my name is Patrick Long with Soku Systems. Today I just want to walk you through an invoice pipeline that I made in my own small business. So invoices are extremely important in every business, right? It's how we get paid. It's why we do our business in the first place. But there's a lot that goes into them that is just a lot of admin work and can kind of drag you away from the real part of your business that you enjoy and probably why you started your business in the first place, right? So today I'm just going to walk you through the pipeline I made that turned my invoicing structure from a manual thing that I did in QuickBooks every single month into something that is much more automated that I only have to look at for a few minutes every month. So here we are in make.com, and I've got 6 scenarios laid out, which I know can be a little scary, but it's really important that we don't just take everything and shove it into one giant scenario. Uh, there's a few reasons for that. One, we're working with QuickBooks today, and QuickBooks is able to actually emit events for every little action that happens, and sometimes we want to capture those. And if we can do it in a little bit of a smart way, we can capture those events when some of our other automations trigger them, or if we are actually doing things manually in QuickBooks ourselves, so we can still pick up automation on the back end. So a lot of times, if we like build out these big automation systems, it starts at one end and it does a ton of stuff and is totally complete at the other end. Well, businesses aren't always, we don't always have to do things the exact same way. Sometimes something comes up, whatever, you got to do something yourself. And now you're like in the middle of that process and you've got to finish it all yourself usually. So we're going to try to build this system to avoid that. We're going to catch the events from QuickBooks at particular points and then progress through the pipeline. All right, so here we are in make.com, and we're on our first scenario of the pipeline, and this one's where you're actually going to get the most value because it's what actually creates the invoice for you and pre-fills those line items. So for my particular business, it's a writing business. We create articles for our websites, so every one of my line items is going to be an article. And likewise, I made this a sub scenario that I could call from a different pipeline, and for me, it's going to be from my publisher pipeline. So every time my publisher says, "Yep, this article is published and completed and totally done," it'll go through, do everything I need to do for that pipeline, but then it'll also call this and kick it off. So the first thing it's going to do is just get the article that we just published, get the client that's related, make sure that client actually uses QuickBooks because I have a flag for that. So sometimes I use Stripe, sometimes I use QuickBooks. It just depends on the client. And then get the invoice for that. So you can see that I'm using Notion here, but this logic would work with Airtable or any other CMS that you might have, or whatever you like to use. So, but Make.com and QuickBooks are going to function the exact same way. So then I'm going to go through and check that all of the articles are completed. So in this route line here, I actually have a variable called, I'm just going to assume that all these articles are completed. So I'll set it to true, and then I'll trust but verify, right? So then you loop over each article and check that it is not completed. So if it's not equal to completed, not equal to published, then I'm going to go through and set this to false. And so it'll loop through them all. There's usually, not that many. And then once it finishes, it'll come down to this next route here and it'll say, hey, give me that flag that you made and let me check it. And it'll check that all articles completed is still true. So now that I've gone through and made sure that they're all completed, otherwise we wouldn't get past here and we never make it to QuickBooks, and so we won't do anything. But anyway, we're going to go get all of the articles and each one of them aggregate the information that we need, which is going to be like our pricing information and such. And then we're actually going to go through and make the invoice with the QuickBooks create an invoice module. So when you create a customer in QuickBooks, you'll have to go and get the customer QuickBooks ID. You can find that in the URL if you're looking over the customer, but I chose to store that in Notion, so you can do that, and then you're going to need that here, so you'll store it there. Your line items is going to be an array, so like I said, I made an array here with this aggregator with all of the article title, the word count, and the rate that I charge per word. and then QuickBooks calculates that out. And then you can set some other things like your sales term, like net 30, and the doc number is really important for me. So I give my invoices a number that correspond to like the client ID and what invoice we're on. And this is going to be really important for the later parts of the pipeline. So however you choose to assign a number to your invoice, that's where you'll put it here. That's the gist of it. After this runs, you'll have an actual invoice in QuickBooks, and you can go look at it manually if you like. But you can also go to the second scenario in this pipeline, which we'll look at now. All right, so here we are in the next part of the pipeline. And so if you're just looking at this really quick, you might ask yourself, all right, we have this new this new scenario for when an invoice was created. Why don't we just take all this? There's just 3 little modules here. Why don't we just tack it on to what we just did? And the reason we don't want to do that is because personally, I'm tracking all of these invoices in Notion so that I could keep track of what state they're in, if they've been paid or not. And I try to do a little bit of financial forecasting over in Notion as well. If I ever do go into QuickBooks and manually make an invoice, which I'm surely going to have to do at some point, maybe I get a brand new client, they're not in the system yet, whatever it is. Whenever I do that manually, QuickBooks is still going to emit this event, and it'll still get picked up here. And so instead of, like I said earlier, starting in the middle of our automation and having to do the rest of it ourselves, the automation can just pick up where our manual work left off. But it's also going to catch what we did in scenario 1, so it'll catch our automation as well. So there's nothing too crazy in here. The hardest part about this is figuring out these events. So there's documentation from QuickBooks online about all the attributes of these events, but let me tell you, it is confusing. So to actually get when an invoice is created, I know when I write it out here, it sounds pretty simple. The object type is an invoice, and the operation was create. An invoice was created. But when you do that, QuickBooks emits so many events, and so there's a lot of data to go through. And actually, I couldn't even really figure out the documentation. What I did was I set up one of these event listeners and had it run for 2 months while I was actually running my business. And I wasn't too worried about this automation pipeline at the moment. And I just had it gather the data on what the events really were. So then I was able to use that data and actually write it down. So maybe you can benefit a little bit from my trial and error. But so here we have an object, which was an invoice, and the operation was create. So we have created a new invoice in that filter. And then we're going to go search up that invoice. So this will also return the ID that is native to QuickBooks. It's not your invoice ID. So you need to search that up there. But then inside of this, you will get that doc number that we just set. And then I use that doc number to search up my actual invoices. And then I'm going to update the status of my invoice saying, hey, I know that in Notion, I'm going to say, hey, I know I've created an invoice for this. And then once we know that an invoice has been created, we need to tell ourselves or whoever on your team is responsible to go ahead and mark it to be ready to send after they need to change something or do whatever. But we want to mark it so that our system can go back on the first of the month and send it for us. So automatically sending invoices on the first of the month is a little difficult in QuickBooks. If you charge your clients the exact same amount every month, then it's kind of easy to set up. You could also do that kind of thing on Stripe. But if you charge them a variable amount, like in my small business where I'm writing articles, I charge by the word. It could be plus or minus a couple $100. So it's not the same every month, and setting up a recurring invoicing structure inside QuickBooks is very difficult. But we can just use Make to do that ourselves. So what I did was, you notice an extra module here, just so I could format the date correctly. I was having the worst time with the Make functions. I just fell back to regular Python to do that, and it gets me the first of the next month. So, and then it feeds that directly into the email. Making these emails, I want to show you one little tip where you can go the extra mile when you're making these emails. And if you're working with a team of people, they will definitely appreciate it. You can make HTML inside of this email here. So you make your subject. That's pretty easy. I say, hey, mark this invoice as ready to send. And then you can write a whole bunch of HTML. But of course, I didn't write this. I got my favorite AI to write it for me. But what I sent, I'm going to show you in ChatGPT here. I did write out some HTML by myself, where I have the properties and all the basic little things I want to say. So this was like a little paragraph, a break, a link, another paragraph, and it was so ugly and so simple. And then, of course, we can get ChatGPT to make something way bigger. And since I use ChatGPT a lot, it even knows my business name, it knows my colors, and it made something branded. And then we end up with an email that looks like this. Of course, it's not blowing anybody's socks off, but it's way better than just a couple lines of text. So I highly recommend put in a little bit of extra time and do that. So what does this say here? It says, hey, there was just an invoice that was made in QuickBooks, either automatically with our system or somebody did it manually. This is the invoice number. It was for this client. If you go ahead and mark this invoice as ready, it'll be sent on May 1st. So mark this as ready. What this is going to do is pull up this fill out form. And if you haven't used fill out before, it's really nice to use with Notion. It can connect directly to Notion, and you put in a formula field in your Notion with this URL, and it will link to it, and every single record in Notion can access this form individually. And so this invoice I have in Notion, and if we mark it as ready here, woohoo, that will actually come to the next part of our pipeline, which is this form right here. So this just says, hey, catch that webhook that fill out is going to send us, and then get that invoice and then update it as ready to send. So we've got invoices created, and now someone manually has went in and said, yes, we need to send this invoice on the 1st. I always like to have that manual intervention. I don't want to be sending invoices automatically before someone looks at them to clients, because if that gets messed up, you look really bad, and it's not a good move to do. So we've got our invoices ready to go, and then in the next step, we will show how we can actually send them. All right, so here we are in the 4th step of our pipeline, and this is a scenario that's going to run on a monthly basis on the 1st of the month at 7 a.m. And when it does that, the first thing it's going to do is search for invoices in Notion. And I've got a field in Notion called QuickBooks Invoice State, and I'm going to check for all of my records that say they're ready to send. And make sure that you up your limit there, because if you've got, I think the default is 10, and so if you've got 12 invoices ready to send, you're not going to send 2 of them. Then we will check that we have some to send. Whenever you do a search in Make, it returns something called a bundle. So we search for invoices, maybe we have 5, so the total number of bundles is going to be 5. So if we search and we don't get anything, that means we don't have anything that's ready to send. So we need this filter will stop this scenario altogether. If we've got some invoices to send, we need to iterate over each one of them and search for that invoice in QuickBooks. So when we do this here, you'll actually search and get the QuickBooks object, and we're going to limit it to just one. So we're going to have bundles again because we did a search, but we should only ever get one of them. And if we weren't able to find the object, so our bundle says 0, there was a disconnect in our system somewhere. Notion thinks we have an invoice. QuickBooks says we don't. We need to send ourselves an error notification with all the details that we can. It's really good to do error handling inside of Make whenever you can, and like proactive error handling here, because this won't actually throw a real error. It'll just return 0 bundles, and it's fine. And Make.com will send you an email if you like throw a real error, but if it returns 0 bundles, it'll just fail silently. So we want to send ourselves an email when we can. Maybe you like Telegram or Slack or whatever, notification. If we did find our invoice, cool. Now we're actually going to go and send it. And so we'll send that invoice. It'll have the ID from here. And this will actually throw a real error if it isn't able to send the invoice that you told it to send. And so you can tell that we've got an actual error handler here because these little dots are not filled in. But on any module here, it'll make you just right click. You said add error handler. And now if this module has like a real error inside of Make, this is what it'll go to instead of just like stopping altogether. And so what I chose to do here was send an email to myself first, and then commit just means, All right, cool, let's end the scenario there. This will send all of our invoices at the first of the month that are marked as ready to send, and then QuickBooks will send out another event telling us that we have emailed the invoice to the client. So that'll be step number 5 in our pipeline. So here we are in scenario number 5 of our pipeline. We're almost done, but this is another one of those where we're looking for events from QuickBooks, and this one is also pretty simple. The object type is event, and the operation is emailed. And so this says, hey, we've actually emailed the invoice to the client, and this is another one of those steps in our pipeline that will catch manual and automated work at the same time. So if you did it yourself, or if you're relying on the rest of the pipeline, it's all going to come through here, and we'll be able to update our CMS, which I'm using Notion here. So when it does that, we're going to go ahead and get the invoice from the ID there, and that'll let us use that doc number again to go back into Notion and find my Notion record of the invoice. Then I'm going to update that status again as, hey, I've actually sent it. And then I also have a payment requested date, so I can keep track of how fast particular clients pay their invoices, and I like to keep that in there. And then I'm actually going to go through all of the articles in that invoice and do the exact same thing. Update that they're waiting on a payment and when that was. Nothing too complicated, but let's get into the fun part of our pipeline, which is when our invoices get paid. Okay, so here we are in the last scenario of our pipeline. And again, we're going to be looking for another one of those QuickBooks events. And here, this is where it gets a little bit complicated because we're not working with an invoice object anymore. We're working with a payment object. And so you have to take that payment object and figure out what it applies to. We're going to take it, we have to search it up through the get a payment module. So we'll actually get that payment object, and then we can figure out which invoice it applies to. So then after we get the payment, we've got to go through and get the invoice. And it's really important that you look at the invoice and then you make sure that its balance is equal to 0. So make sure that it's fully paid, because if you do a partial payment, it'll come through here and then it'll say, your system might say, oh, cool, invoice paid. But if they only paid like half or however you allow them to do that, could get messed up here. So we want to make sure that the invoice was fully paid. And then when it is, we get that doc number and we search it up in Notion again, get the actual invoice object, update it to tell it that everything is fully complete. And then again, we're going to update that the date that we got it paid so we can track that, and then iterate through our articles and do it the exact same way and update all of them. So that's the big idea of the invoice pipeline. There is a little bit that goes into it. It's not really too complex, and of course what I built, there are definitely ways to improve it. Maybe you saw some things that you could improve yourself, but building systems like this is what takes your standard operating procedures you do every day in your business and then really cuts down the time it takes to do them, but maintaining accuracy, or probably improving accuracy, and error handling. If you want to build even more systems like this, check out some of the other videos on the channel or subscribe for future builds. If you would like help integrating these automations into your business, you can reach out to Soku Systems. We would love to help you. Just go to sokusystems.com/call.